Good evening, everybody. Crystal Hubbard here, new YouTube channel. Well, not a new channel, but new videos on the channel. So here we go. While I'm stuck inside, I just finished, you can see the current show going on now, Axonar Live. I just finished the Two Geek Girls on the Axonar YouTube channel. And I thought I would actually continue with the video, my reaction to the video. I started watching last night. It's from the Taco, one of my favorite. I love the channel. Love it. It's a great way to pass the time. They had a video come up a little while ago called Strict Rules Professional Female Horseback Riders Have to Follow. So I grew up horseback riding. I have a family. It's a family business. My aunt was a trainer. My aunt trained me. It was a little different when I was doing it, as has been impressed upon me, as I have ridden recreationally at several show barns since I competed as a much younger person. I competed my first show about 7 years old, maybe 6, and I stopped competing in my early 20s. I was very fortunate. It was wonderful. I always wanted to be the girl with the pony. I got my first horse full size when I was 12 years old. I got to have him for about 20 years. He didn't pass away until into his 30s, and it was wonderful. I loved competing. And I was very interested in this video to see if it was anything I was familiar with or don't remember or something new. The women that they're speaking about today are elite athletes. They are Olympic level. I was nowhere near that. So I'm interested what I will think about what they have to say, because it may be a glimpse into something I didn't get to see all those years. I'm going to be playing on my computer because I don't want to show anything I don't have permission to show, but I do want to give a shout out to the people who created it, so there you go. The volume is pretty good, the mic on my phone is pretty good, so hoping you guys can hear everything. I'll just pause the video when I'm ready to say it, and it's very haphazard, but here we go.
Sure.
Most Olympic athletes only have to worry about their own performances, but equestrian riders have a 1-ton animal to think about. Riding is not for the faint-hearted, but some of the best believe there are some rules that...
I just want to point out they're showing like a montage of people having major crashes and accidents right now, which is not inaccurate, but there you go.
Change. Intense training. Charlotte Dujardin has 3 gold and 1 silver Olympic medals in dressage, but her road to success has involved rigorous training. Professional riders need to train hard, and phoning it in isn't an option. Charlotte rides 7 days a week from 7:30 in the morning until 5 o'clock at night. On weekdays, she finishes up at the barn and hits the gym, but on the weekends, she spends time teaching others how to ride. Each night, she's in bed by 9:30 so she can wake up and start it all over again.
So basically, they're kind of covering the fact that this is an elite athlete. I mean, it doesn't matter really what sport you're going to become a part of. All of us at some point become familiar with the dedication involved, even if it's not firsthand. We hear about it. We gain respect for it. These are elite athletes. They eat, sleep, and breathe this. That is absolutely accurate. It is hard to impress upon people the athleticism involved in becoming a competent horseback rider, because a lot of them make it look easy. And it's hard to explain. To give you an example, I had a trainer I worked with who rode multiple horses every day for years. She was in amazing shape. She was almost 60 years old, and she went for a physical one day, and her physician's like, "Wow, what do you do to stay in shape?" And she's like, "Well, I'm a horseback trainer." And he's like, "That's cute. What do you do to stay in shape?" Are you serious? Like, it's even when I was competing at my level, I was riding 6 days a week, multiple horses, because I wanted to help train, and I needed to help train other horses because it helped supplement what it was costing me to train myself and my horse. It's 7, in my case, it was usually 7 to 7. You had to be there first thing in the morning, and you left after it was dark. And you crashed at night, and you got up in the morning, and you had a list of everything you needed to do. It is consistent when they're talking about her training and working with other people. That's really what you have to do to make this a profession, because it costs money to have horses, it costs money to train, it costs money to feed them. It's an enormous expense. But if you turn it into a business where you're training other people and you're training other horses and it's your barn, that becomes a big difference. That's how you make it a profession. So this particular athlete is incredibly well known for good reason. So but again, what they're highlighting is an athletic attitude toward your profession. So that's not unusual. It's incredibly accurate. The one thing I hope they impress upon in this is that when it comes to working with horses, the time that you spend with them is the difference between life and death, because you don't have to feed your pommel horse and you don't have to make sure your basketball got enough sleep last night. This is something where you are responsible for the performance of your partner, and there is an enormous difference between an athlete who takes the time and dedication to understand really being a competent equestrian versus somebody who does it as a hobby, and maybe doesn't even spend that much time with the animal. It's really hard to explain the connection you need to have, because you have a partner that doesn't speak your language. You have to learn to speak theirs, and you have to learn to communicate with them. There are multiple situations I could point out that are life and death, because something could happen while you are charging toward a solid object over 20 miles an hour on an animal that weighs more than 1,000 pounds, and something could go wrong. Do you have the experience, wherewithal, and athleticism and relationship with the horse to get yourself out of a dangerous situation, because people do die doing this sport? So there's two sides. One, how competent you become as an athlete in the sport, but also really your relationship with the animals that you work with are another level, unlike any other competition. So there you go.
According to Charlotte, she takes a mere 10 days of vacation time per year without any horses, and then it's right back in the saddle.
Yeah.
This Olympic champion believes that riding is all about repetition, correction, and being strong with yourself. In order to stay consistent in the ring, you need to maintain good discipline outside of it. Accommodations. Sonia Johnson won a silver medal in team eventing at the 2008 Beijing Olympics, and she has strong opinions on one of the rules in high-level competitions. She commented on the fact that rider Shannon Bailey wasn't allowed to take part in the EVA 95 section of the Lakes and Craters International Horse Trials.
Yeah.
Shannon was born without any fingers on her left hand and only a partial thumb. Despite competing for 12 years, she wasn't able to compete in this event because of her missing digits. Although many fans were outraged by this, Sonia believes this may have been a rule-mandated safety concern rather than discrimination. She encouraged Shannon to apply for an exemption so she can hold the reins in a way that works best for her. 10-year-old Kyra Barrett found herself in a similar situation when Equestrian Canada refused to let her use a guide horse during a competition. Kira was born legally blind, but by using a guide horse, she had been able to compete in cross-country, jump, and dressage until this restriction was put into place. The Disability Alliance BC called this decision discouraging and unfair, and hopes this rule will change in the future to allow people like Kira to compete.
Okay, so they do have a personal story about this. They do have rules about your equitation. It's how you sit in the saddle, and it's how you appear physically on the horse, and there are points that they do from the head down in how your seat on the horse, basically, is what they call it. So that could be with how you hold the reins is strict. How you sit up is strict. I knew girls with scoliosis who had to figure out how to sit differently on the horse so that they could win a competition, as opposed to doing what helped them balance best on the horse. I knew one girl who didn't have her left arm from a little bit below the elbow down, and learned how to ride with one hand. And there were times she wasn't allowed to compete because the rules strictly said how you had to hold the reins, and she was holding them differently to compensate for reining her horse in English as opposed to Western. Yeah, there are very strict rules about your appearance, basically, while you're competing, and they've been disputed over the years because people have been able to perform more than adequately what is asked of the rider and the horse physically, but their appearance is different. And this has been a controversy for years. So yeah, I remember that the first particular case. I don't remember the one with the guide horse, but actually horses do make good guide horses, so that's a good thing to look up if you get a chance.
A huge part of equestrian events is the bond between rider and horse, unless you're talking about the pentathlon. This Olympic sport is made up of 5 different events: fencing, freestyle swimming, pistol shooting, cross-country running, and equestrian show jumping. Sounds easy, right? The riding portion of the event involves jumping a 350 to 450 meter course with between 12 to 15 obstacles. The catch here is that riders are randomly paired up with their mounts only 20 minutes before the event begins. Chloe Esposito represented Australia at the 2016 Summer Olympics and overcame a 45-second handicap to take home the gold medal in the modern pentathlon. This athlete had been riding since age 12 and hopes to make it into the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. Learn to fall.
So it's fascinating when they do a random pairing like that. It would only work in certain situations, but obviously there were times I had good rides on horses that I had never ridden before. As your competency as a rider goes up, your ability to adapt to other horses that you're riding, notice I said adapt to the horses, not the other way around, adapt to them, it does increase. I don't know if that would be a sport I would be interested in, because there's a lot of factors involved, and I would wonder if they had also considered the temperament of the horse. Not all horses are meant to be with all riders. Not all horses are meant to do all sports. Not all horses are good with beginners or this rider or that rider. Pairing is something that's taken into enormous consideration when a rider is looking at buying a horse. There's a lot of factors involved. So this is an interesting competition. It's not like you're riding another horse on the team of horses you're working with that you might be familiar with. You're actually competing in an intense situation, and there's a lot of factors in that. So it's a sport I've heard of. It's not one I'm very familiar with, but that would be the one thing I would wonder about if I was presented with that situation. So good on them for adaptability.
Of course, learning how to ride a horse is essential, but so is learning how to fall. Just ask Holly Bennett-Awad, who was sent to the hospital 3 times in the lead up to the 2012 London Olympics.
Yeah.
Her horse, Gin and Juice, has a history of bucking, and Holly took a huge fall during the games as well. She suffered a concussion and a sacral fracture, but it could have been a lot worse. Ideally, a falling rider should stretch out their arms and aim to absorb most of the impact with the area from their elbows to the...
Okay, hold on. It's okay. I'm gonna be interested what she's actually going to say about learning to fall. I will say, as I became familiar with riding a particular horse over time and having particular problems consistently arise with that horse, I did get better at landing on my feet and then my butt first in some situations. And you take that, like, you do get better in particular situations. There are horses that maybe have learned bad habits, and you're trying to sometimes merely convince them that no matter what they do, you're getting back on, and they just give up. I'm not going to say that that's anything to try and do. I'm just saying that there might be repetitive problems in the arena with certain rides. But at the end of the day, you could do your absolute best to try and fall. But what we're really maybe doing is learning to anticipate a certain type of problem with the horse. Like it might refuse this fence because it doesn't like certain things. It might have a bad mood today. You might suspect it's not feeling great today. It's more about the anticipation, but there's a habit certain horses got into. We used to say, if the horse wants you off, you're coming off. And that's kind of absolutely true, because there are particular moves certain horses learned where they basically bumped you forward. You're now near their neck. They roll their shoulder and then they bump you again and you go down. They know that if their head disappears between their front legs, you're down. You're hitting the ground. It might be your fault they decided to buck you off. It might be they're not feeling it today. You certainly hope you're at a point with your mount that you understand how to make them feel better in the arena and they don't feel like they want to buck you off. Hopefully you've hit that point, but there's only so much preparation for falling, because it's either a situation that you see coming and now you can prepare for the type of fall that might happen, or It's an unforeseen circumstance where the horse, God forbid, a rabbit jumps out from behind and the horse didn't see it coming, and it ran out from behind the fence and the horse spooked and you fell off, like, because suddenly the horse was over here and you were still suspended in air for 2 seconds before you hit the ground because the horse just disappeared, ran that way before you could figure out what it was doing. That does happen, by the way. So I don't know if you can really, you do get better. You do get better at understanding what falling feels like. But you certainly don't want to go up to a fence anticipating that the horse is going to knock you off. Because then it probably will. That's another thing. So I don't know. I'm a little amused by this part.
With their hands. Using their hands directly can cause wrist injuries, and sometimes it's better to make a clean fall than to cling to an out-of-control horse.
Tuck and roll.
It's also important for riders to tuck their chins and round their backs to prevent serious neck injury.
Okay, so what they're showing is riders who have had multiple falls, so they do actually end up with an instinct to tuck their head. They do end up pulling their arms in. They basically tuck and roll because they become more familiar with the physicality of what is happening in the situation when either the horse is tripped or is beginning to refuse a fence. Again, you have become more familiar with the feeling of what is happening to you. So yes, you do get better at falling. It is going to happen. The more you ride, the more likely it is to happen. I hope it doesn't, but it will. We used to have a joke about you're not a real rider until you've fallen off 3 times. So I'm a real rider, let me tell you right now. So yes, that's true. You do get better at it.
And once they land, they need to get out of the way as quickly as possible to avoid being stepped on. Cost of competing. Training for the Olympics can be incredibly expensive, especially if you're competing in an equestrian event. Show caliber horses aren't cheap, and that's putting it mildly. It's estimated that the 236 horses in the Rio Olympics were worth over $100 million in total. It's not uncommon for individual horses to cost between $700,000 and $15 million. Edwina Tops-Alexander came in 9th in individual show jumping riding a horse named Lintea Tequila, who's worth $7.5 million. Now, Lintea Tequila has retired at the ripe old age of 16 after winning 5-star Grand Prix classes in Doha and Miami. Not only does the sport require a lot of time and dedication, but riders need to have the funds to cover their expenses. Barrel racing.
Okay, so that's absolutely true. Just like any other athletic animal, it can really get up there in cost. And one thing to consider is you pay every time you compete. You don't necessarily win. You certainly don't necessarily win enough money to compensate for what you spent getting to that competition, no matter what the purse is in the Grand Prix. But what you're really paying for is the reputation. If you are an Olympic rider, you have the possibility of starting a really successful business. You have clout. You are now an Olympic rider, and your horse is now an Olympic horse. Like it's everything else involved. So sometimes it's hard to explain to people why that particular animal is worth that particular amount of money. Well, it's everything else involved, kind of like real estate. And I hate to take away the quote humanity of the animal. That's not the right word, but really understanding that the animal itself matters, not as a piece of equipment, even though that's what they classify it as. But when you're talking about the finances involved, yeah, it's everything else around the animal and the potential that the animal has as it continues to succeed in this very public arena. Just like with a horse racing, an animal that competes, that particular horse that's racing may not ever win as much purse money as somebody paid for it. But when you take into consideration the clout that it brings to the barn, to the trainer, to the owner, to any animal that is bred through that bloodline, including any further generations from that particular horse, that's where the money is coming in. That's where its value is really being considered. So that's one other thing to look at, as opposed to the actual value of the animal, but the forward-thinking financial value of having that animal in that competition for the people involved with it.
There are many different events riders can take part in, but one of the most heart-pounding of them all is barrel racing. Unlike other equestrian activities, there aren't any subjective points to be earned here. The most important rule here is you have to be fast. Riders need to complete the pattern properly and are penalized for knocking over barrels. Professional barrel
Within
racer
seconds.
Fallon Taylor says even when you're trying to beat the clock, you still need to be patient with your horse. In addition to going fast, riders also have to maintain precise control over their horses in order to be successful. This sport and barrel racing requires maintaining precise control under incredible speeds. Stable rules. Every stable has its own rules, but this is...
Hey, it's Brian from Samcart, and if you're trying to build a real business...
Okay, so we'll let the ad play. So yeah, barrel racing is one that I never competed in. It was something we were allowed to do for fun in a couple of the barns and never at a competition feats. Those are the horses that are great at that are horses that have been trained and encouraged to compete in that sport. And barrel racing is exactly what they say it is. It's incredible speeds, it's precision. These horses are turning on a dime. And what's really interesting is that a lot of the women who compete in barrel racing are competing show to show. They live out of their trailers. They construct their paddocks. They make sure their horse is fed, and then they hope to God they have enough money to feed themselves. And I'm not even exaggerating about this. And then, so they travel with their horses show to show. And the difference between making enough money to get through the next week and not getting a part of the purse is 1/10 of a second. It's insane. So it's yeah, this is a sport where a lot of these girls competing have put years into learning how to do it, training the horses that they work with to do it. And if they don't win this competition, they're in big trouble financially. So I've had some heartbreaking stories I've been familiar with barrel racing. So here we go.
Taken to the next level at the Olympics. These horses come from all over the world and
Barn
need to be
rules.
at their absolute best, so there's no room for getting sick. During the 2016 Summer Olympics, they were stabled at the National Equestrian Center located at the Deodoro Olympic Park in Rio de Janeiro. Riders are only allowed to access the area between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. so that all the horses can get a good night's rest and be ready for the next day. Whether you're a human or a horse, you have to walk through a disinfectant bath in order to enter the stable so no germs are brought in. Each piece of equipment has to be properly sprayed down and sanitized, and every horse requires a clean bill of health and up-to-date vaccine records to be allowed inside. Once they're inside, they're still checked over twice a day by a veterinarian just to be safe. Banned substances. Equestrians have a long list of substances they're not allowed to take during competitions, and one bad test might have seriously derailed Canada's position in the 2020 Olympics. Nicole Walker helped her team qualify for the Tokyo Games with her scores at the Pan Am Games in Lima. That is, until she tested positive for a banned substance. However, Nicole insists that the result isn't from anything illegal, but rather from a drink called cocoa tea, a common treat in South America. She maintains her innocence and has filed an appeal. In her defense, medical tests have shown that drinking just a single cup of cocoa tea can result in a positive test for up to 24 hours. Since Nicole is at an Olympic level, the stakes here are incredibly high. If her appeal isn't successful, her team will lose their spot at the Olympics and millions of dollars in financing. Error, of course. Everyone...
Yeah, the consequences of being caught with something, whether it's something you use to directly interfere with the performance of the animal or yourself. Of course, it's Olympic level. The consequences are dire. You very rarely hear about something like that happening with the riders. Not saying it doesn't happen. It's just pretty rare. The drug of choice for the trainers and riders I knew growing up was cigarettes. These were the days where everybody smoked, and especially people who worked in the riding. No joke. They would be smoking a cigarette in the training arena, put the cigarette out, go do their class, which is the show arena. They do their run, their class, because class number 13A is now showing rider number 547, Susie Q, and riding Mary Sue. Please compete in your class now. They would go in, they put out the cigarette, they'd ride there, and then they'd light up as they were walking out back to the training arena. They always had a cigarette in their mouth. So it Of course it happens anywhere in athlete. Anywhere you're under enormous pressure, like being at a Grand Prix or Olympic level. But more often or not, what you most predominantly have to deal with when it comes to the animals is somebody giving them some sort of banned painkiller or performance enhancing drug because they're not competing at the level you want them to. Maybe they're sore, maybe they're strained, maybe they have an injury. So doing some sort of injection that makes them continue to compete on a limb, that it's a banned substance for a reason. If the horse is competing on an injured limb, obviously they can make the injury worse and it could be permanent. So that's the most common thing that they test for, but there you go.
Millions of dollars in financing. Error, of course. Everyone knows Mary-Kate Olsen is an actress and fashion designer, but she's also an equestrian. She competed in the Longines Global Champions Tour
She's
at
very
Club de
talented.
Campo Via in Madrid in May
She's not just
2019.
wealthy, she's
But
talented.
unfortunately for Mary-Kate, she
hardworking.
broke a major rule during this international show jumping competition. She ended up being disqualified during her run with her horse Fatum because of an error of course. All obstacles must be completed in a certain way, and there's no room for mistakes.
Yeah.
Despite this setback, Mary-Kate managed to place 6th in her class with her horse Naomi. Blood rule.
Okay, so error of course, I don't think they made that abundantly clear as far as each of the fences is numbered in order and you have to do the fence in that order and oftentimes in that direction that they say. You can't just do the fence in it. You have to run the course. You have to go over this fence, this, and then turn and do it this direction, this direction. So error of course is what we would actually say is she went off course. I guess the official term could be error in course, but it's really off course. You're off course. They announce that as soon as it happens. Either you did a course for the other class by accident, or you missed a fence, or you jumped a fence you shouldn't have. It is not an error to say, do a circle and come around in that direction and do it again. You just lost some time, or you've been penalized for the performance error, but you're not necessarily off course. Say your horse goes around the fence or it refuses the fence and goes around it, and you do a circle to come around and then go around the fence again. That's not an off course. An off course would actually be taking the fence when you shouldn't have, or in the wrong direction, or missing the fence and going on to the next one. That's off course. So it's unfortunate because some of these classes, no joke, cost thousands of dollars just to step into the arena. And of course it costs you sometimes an unimaginable amount of money just to get to. So this could be the big class you were in. I've seen people pay thousands of dollars for the class that everybody at the show is there that weekend to see. It's the big Grand Prix and they go off course. It does happen. Sucks. Blood rule. Okay, so here's blood rule.
On the surface, the blood rule seems to make perfect sense, but some equestrians believe it needs to go. Basically, it means that any trace of blood found on a horse means an instant disqualification. This regulation is supposed to stop riders from being too rough, but sometimes small injuries can happen on accident or just be a fluke. Diane Creech was eliminated from the Grand Prix special because of this rule. She claims a very small Old Bell boot rub had opened up during the ride, and since she didn't know enough about the rule to challenge it at the time, the official results were published and now cannot be changed. Olympic dressage team bronze medalist Laura Graves supports this rule, although she acknowledges that if a rider injures their horse, it's almost always an accident. She believes it's important for the safety of the horses that this restriction stay in place, but others like Olympian Eric Lamaze think the rule is outdated and doesn't protect horses as much as it reassures the uninformed public.
Okay, so here's my thing about the blood rule. I do believe it needs to be circumstantial, and here's why. Sometimes an injury happens. A horse accidentally clips its hooves and it accidentally nicks itself. Sometimes the horse could have accidentally nicked itself over a fence. Sometimes it's literally a nick, and I think that should be evaluated by a vet. And I think that the judgment should be made between the officials and the veterinarian if that is a circumstantial injury, and that the blood rule does not apply because the horse is okay. It's the equivalent of accidentally scratching yourself. This does happen and everyone's okay, but it should be acknowledged and noticed and evaluated by a professional. Okay, so here's one thing I have seen becoming a normal thing, and I'm gonna do a bit of a shout out. I'm gonna call out the Greater San Diego Hunter Jumper Association for something that it allows. It allows riders now to basically have horrendous spurs on the horses. If the horse is wearing what is now being, I don't even know what they call this, it's relatively new. It is a wide band, usually of a rubber-like substance, may even be rubber, that goes around the belly of the horse. It's not the girth. It is another band a little bit behind that where the spurs are. And what it is doing, I know this for a fact because I've seen them take the band off of the horse in the stall area, is hiding bloody spur marks from the training with the horse. And so now what the riders have are these really sharp scissor spurs that they're using to make sure the horse feels them spurring it with the band around it. But there are people in there. When they say not being too rough, they mean that these riders sometimes use the spurs so forcefully that the horse is bleeding from its side. That is not how you're supposed to use spurs, and I could literally do an entire video about that. It's not how you're supposed to use spurs. It's not how you're supposed to treat the animal. There should be no part of you okay with, well, I don't care if it's bleeding as long as it goes. This is what the blood rule was about. It was about making sure that the horse isn't being pulled in the mouth, it's not being whipped with the crop, and it's not being spurred to the point where it bleeds. So, unfortunately, riders are getting around this by just covering up the fact that their horses are covered in spur marks. And it's becoming normal. So I saw this personally in the Greater San Diego Hunter Jumper Association. And it was absolutely disgusting. So there you go. But that's why I think it should be circumstantial. If it's because of a tool and the rider just isn't a good enough rider to respect the animal, they should be disqualified. There you go.
It may sound
Horse
counterintuitive, but sometimes an injured horse performs better than a perfectly healthy one. If a horse's legs are in pain, it will often jump higher to reduce the risk of hitting them against obstacles.
'Cause it
Riders
hurts.
need to ensure that their mounts are in pristine condition or risk ending up like Tiffany Foster. Her horse Victor was disqualified from an Olympic show jumping event just 15 minutes before it was supposed to begin for this very reason. Her team manager Terrence Miller was furious about the decision, saying that this rule was supposed to be put in place to protect the horses, but Victor was in no danger in this situation. Rail down. Lucy Davis made it.
Yeah, if it's a circumstance where your horse is clearly in pain or injured, this is known. There are horrendous practices where they've even taken, you can imagine a stick, and it has nails sticking out of it. They take a long stick meant to go over the top of the fence. And if the horse isn't clearing the fence as high as they want, isn't jumping as they need the horse to compete at this height, because that's what they need it to do for whatever reason, they will have the horse jump the fence and they will hit it with the nails as it goes over the fence. This is an actual documented practice that has been done. They will soar, they will do things to horses to make them lift the feet higher. They're trying to alleviate the pain. And yes, if a horse is being jolted when it hits the fence, it doesn't like hitting the fence because it hurts. It will lift itself more, and but eventually this doesn't work. Eventually, it's just because the horse is in pain. And yeah, if the veterinary officials can prove that the horse was in pain and that was the reason why the horse was performing that way, anyway, I agree with the ruling. I at that particular time agree with the ruling, but I would be interested to see what their appeal was, even if it was informal and just in the court of public opinion.
2016 Summer Olympics only to end up with a 4-fault penalty. She was a member of the American
What was this again?
in no danger in this situation. Rail down. Lucy Davis made it to the 2016 Summer Olympics only to end up with a 4-fault penalty. She was a member of the American equestrian jumping team, but her horse ended up getting spooked and knocking over a rail. At first, Lucy was devastated and blamed herself for dragging down her team, but in the end, they ended up taking home silver medals, which cheered her up considerably. She hopes to redeem herself during the 2020 Olympic Games and show the world that she can follow the rules and leave all the obstacles where they belong.
Okay, well, I don't know if I can really call this a rule breaking. It's not something done on purpose. You are riding an animal. You and the animal are teams. You're a team, And sometimes a rail comes down. Maybe the horse is tired. The horse didn't lift it, didn't judge the jump enough. Maybe you didn't give the horse enough room. Maybe it was your fault. You didn't give the horse enough room to clear the fence. So basically when they made rail down, you ever see a pole come down because somebody nicked it as they were clearing the fence. They were jumping the fence. They made it over the fence, but one pole came down. That's 4 points, and that could cost you the medal. That could cost you everything. This is just what happens. This is rail down. However, an important point to make is that you could knock the entire fence down, and it's still only 4 points. So, yeah, it happens. Those poles, for 2 reasons. One, it does make it more difficult. The horse that cleared the fence better, did a better job of clearing the fence, is going to less likely to knock over the pole, and more likely to win. The horse got lazy, maybe is a little tired, maybe shouldn't have been in that class in the first place, knocks over the pole, you got some points, the better athlete is going to win. There's a reason you can't knock the poles down, and they're on a almost flat cup that it's very easy to knock the poles down. You don't want to touch them at all. It's very easy to knock them down. The other reason for that, and the reason why cross country can be more dangerous, is because cross country fences are meant to stay, even if you run into them, and you and the horse are more likely to suffer an injury. The fences in the arena, for that point reason, are easy to knock down, but also for physical safety. If the obstacle gives when you hit it, you're less likely to suffer a serious injury. So there you go.
Women.
Men
Most
versus
professional
women.
sports have separate leagues for male and female athletes, but not horseback riding. When these pros get to the Olympic level, they need to be prepared to compete against anyone who enters the ring. And it seems like horseback riding might be ahead of the game in this regard. The International Olympic Committee hopes to see more balanced games in 2020, which will feature 18 mixed events, double what was in Rio. Other blended sports include swimming, track, and triathlon. Trust your horse.
Totally depends.
There are a lot of rules in professional riding, but 10-time Olympic medalist Isabel Worth says there's one that's the most essential, and that's having a bond with your horse. She believes the sport is 60% horse and 40% rider, although during an intense competition like the Olympics, it might be something like 55% horse and 45% rider. Isabel describes her relationship with her horses as very close and very emotional. No mules. One of these strict...
Yeah, again, I want to point out, it is a unique sport. If you don't have a relationship with the animal, if you don't trust them and they don't trust you, you will never reach your potential, and you may consequently get seriously injured. There are a lot of circumstances of this, and some wonderful videos on YouTube of riders, horses and riders, coming together to show how much they trust each other, and it's a completely different relationship from somebody who takes... most often what happens is the rider really takes the horse for granted, and horses aren't stupid. They know when you don't respect them, and they'll give it right back to you. So yeah, trust is important, but it's really something that's hard to explain in words.
Rules in horseback riding is
No
that you
mules.
need to compete on an actual horse.
I love mules.
But Christy McLean is working on changing that restriction. She's been campaigning for mules to be allowed to compete. British dressage ended up altering their restrictions based on Christy's work, so now horses...
For the record, a mule is part donkey, part horse. It's a combination, so it's technically part horse.
And all animals born to a mare are allowed to take part. But Christy and her mule Wallace aren't done yet. They're working to convince the International Equestrian Federation that the definition of horse should be altered to include animals like Wallace. What do you think about the rules professional...
Okay, there you go. It's interesting that they ended on the mule. I have seen shows where mules were allowed to compete, but they weren't at this level. They were smaller shows, and it was great. So there you go. There's my reaction to what they were saying. Please let me know what you think in the comments. I'm sure I missed some things. Again, I am nowhere near as qualified as other people. I'm just merely giving my opinion, and I'd love to know yours. So I hope you all have a wonderful night, and thank you. Hey guys, Crystal Hubbard here. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen.